Remember, you also have a revolution as a social movement, the egalitarian stuff. It's a much more elite society. There's going to be a rapid transformation from 1776 to about 1820, and sort of the elite dominating of society there. Remember, to keep the army, the generals had to appeal to them in some way, which means they couldn't treat them like garbage, which they were more akin to doing before. There's even some merit-based things in the army. You have the primogeniture and entails thing, where inheritance is split up instead of going just to the first son. And this is leading to sort of the democratization of American society as things move on. Keep in mind, the elites still do dominate for quite some time there. But you can start to see the beginnings of some change there with that. There is no, by the way, overall distribution of wealth. That does not happen during this time period. What you have more likely is that the inheritance stuff is going to slowly, it's going to take generations for that to happen. It's going to slowly break apart these big land tracts into slightly smaller and smaller pieces as time goes on. African Americans get make some headway here. Remember, this is the necessary evil portion of American history. There is progress in this time period, which is sort of going to get yanked away as the cotton becomes king in the South, and it's going to get way worse than it ever was before in the antebellum period, basically. Some blacks fight for the for the colonies or the United States. All men are created equal. Gained some, obviously, is a phrase done during this time. Abolition in every state north of Delaware, basically, except in New Hampshire, which didn't have, I think it had like 4 slaves in it anyway, making up that number. I don't know if it was, exactly how many. This is generally gradual abolition, as in Connecticut, as we saw in the slavery in Newtown piece there. You had manumission of slaves happening even in the South, as people started to doubt. Remember, necessary evil, necessary to our economy, but obviously potentially not so moral. Even Southerners were potentially recognizing that. Women, sort of the roots of the women's rights movement here. What's the big catchphrase?
All men and women. No, here it is.
That's later. Separate spheres is where, that's more of like the antebellum period, like the 1830s, 40s, 50s, where it's accepted that women have their areas of expertise and men have their areas of expertise. Before it was men had all the expertise. So that's progress there. This is Republican motherhood. Remember that one. Women are given the added responsibility of educating the children in Republican values, which of course means that eventually they're going to need to get educated themselves, which of course means that many women are going to be, that there's advancement in literacy rates in women and things of that nature. A bay becomes more objectionable during this time, more divorce requests. There becomes sort of a little bit of a challenge to the traditional attitude, not radically so, but less arranged marriages, fewer children, a variety of that stuff. So there are some advancements there. Native Americans, not so good for them, as mentioned before. What's the first form of government? Articles of Confederation. Who does the power go to in the Articles? The states. That means that that the states are the ones primarily responsible for forming the government of the United States, if that is the case. They do this pretty substantially with generally bicameral legislatures, except in a couple of the states. But those are the ones, that's really the power source in the United States during that time period. What else about the Articles of Confederation? What's the federal government responsible for in the Articles? Defense and foreign relations primarily, not much else. Remember, the president is just a figurehead. The powers to Congress are minimal, and they are often overshadowed by the same powers being given to the states, which is causing issues. Let's see here, what else? What's the big power not given to the federal government is? They cannot tax is the big one. In order to tax, they're going to have to then amend the Constitution. Even to get their powers passed, remember they needed 2/3, which was 9 out of 13 states. To amend the Constitution, to amend the Articles, what do they have to have? Unanimous, all 13. If you need to call parents or anything now, would be a good time to do that. Text them or call stuff out, and you can call them right now from 9 o'clock departure here. Let's see. There are a couple of successes under the Articles of Confederation, widely accepted successes. The big one is generally the view of Western land. Remember, Maryland refuses to, I think it's Maryland that refuses to join unless unless people give up their Western land claims. There's a lot of competing Western land claims at this point, and they do that. And once that's owned by the federal government has to figure out how to settle these territories. So you had the Ordinance of 1785, which is the basic unit of settlement. They basically divvied up the whole territory into blocks and made certain rules about things for that. So that was sort of the organization of it. Then you had the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which was sort of like the roadmap to a statehood for this one. Congress could appoint governor and judges in initial years. After 5,000 adult males, people could write a temporary constitution, elect a legislature. After 60,000, settlers write a state constitution, which Congress would approve before granting statehood. The other big significance of this Northwest Ordinance is no slavery in the territories. There is a similar Southwest Ordinance that almost passes, that almost does the same thing. Think about how different life the U.S. history would have been if that had been the case. If it had been followed, that is. We have some issues. Spain controls the Mississippi River. They don't want us to trade on it. There is some headway made on that eventually. I think around 1785. I think that's Pinckney's Treaty eventually opens it up in 1795. They've got problems with Native Americans. There's a belief that those Native Americans are conspiring with the British. They have British remaining in western forts against their agreement in the Treaty of Paris of 1783. We can't really do anything about any of this stuff. We've got pirates on the high seas, a lot of defense issues here. On top of that, there's some domestic issues. The first one is the Newburgh conspiracy. Alexander Hamilton and Robert Morris attempt to sort of rile up the army because they haven't been paid in a while. George Washington goes and stops and appeals to appeals to their honor, basically. But it shows how perilous the financial problems are in the United States. Morris tries to get some things passed. Of course, these things don't. We have 12 to 1. He tries to pass a tariff twice, 12 to 1 both times. Remember, they needed to be unanimous. So it was one state away. I think Rhode Island was one, and I can never remember the other one. I want to say it's Maryland, but I might be wrong about that. It might have been New Jersey too. Shays' Rebellion, the other symbol of unrest in the country. Massachusetts has not paid off any of its war debt. They then demand that taxes be paid off in specie. Nobody has any specie because they're in a depression, recession in Massachusetts, and the farmers get robbed. Daniel Shays leads a number of farmers, and there's a rebellion which is put down by the Massachusetts militia after some good old-fashioned mob fun for a while there. This kind of highlights some things as bad about the Articles, which leads to the Philadelphia Convention, which leads to the Constitution. Obviously, 3 branches, checks and balances, kind of key aspects to it. You got the whole Constitution in your own words. Obviously, the other big thing is that more power goes to the federal government, and there are specific powers delegated to the federal government that cannot be superseded by state authority, and that's kind of a big deal. You also have 2 compromises here. Representation was one of the big issues. You had the Virginia plan based on population. If that had been the case, New York and Virginia alone would have been able to dominate the entire United States. You had 1 vote per state, which was the New Jersey plan. and they decide to do a bicameral thing and split it down the middle. Remember, the Senate based on 2 votes per state, and the House of Reps based on population. Remember, those senators not directly elected, by the way. They're elected by the state legislatures. The other big problem is what to do, how to count slaves in representation. The South wants them to count as each one as 1, because they can get more representation that way. The North wants them to count as 0. They compromise right in the middle, 3/5 compromise, that sort of a thing. One of the genius aspects of the Constitution is that despite the fact that the articles had to be changed with the unanimous, they said 9 out of 13 for scrapping the whole thing, and that leads to the ratification process, which, remember, that's the Federalists versus Anti-Federalists. The Federalists have the Federalist Papers written anonymously by Hamilton, Jay, and Madison, which argue for accepting ratification of the Constitution. It is a close vote in many states. The Anti-Federalists led by George Clinton, Patrick Henry, George Mason, James Monroe, Richard Henry Lee, and they argued that the federal government would trample on individual liberty. There's no Bill of Rights, that sort of a thing. And the Federalists basically argued that the nation was going to be susceptible to internal and external threats if they didn't do something about this. So, of course, the Federalists win. New York is sort of the key state there. When New York rejects ratification, remember at first, when New York City threatens to secede from New York State, they agree that they will send a letter saying that they demand the Bill of Rights to be added on, and of course that happens once the new republic is launched. We're doing very well here. George Washington's first term, or obviously first president here, a lot of precedents set. Remember, that's one of the key things, the precedents for the president. Picked a well-rounded cabinet based on expertise and skill and merit. Hamilton in the Treasury, Jefferson as Secretary of State, Henry Knox as Secretary of War. Washington stuck with the commander-in-chief role and sort of only diplomacy and defense as his role, only vetoes 2 laws. Remember, he also has his farewell address there mixed in with it, where he steps down after 2 terms, very big precedent, and he encourages no political parties. He also encourages neutrality, not getting involved in anybody else's affairs. What's that? Remember, the big name of the game under Washington's first and second term of office is actually not George Washington at all, but who's the big name? Joy?
What?
Your hero?
Hamilton?
Your history crush, I would dare say. Is
What?
What?
I completely missed everything you just said.
Who's your
Alexander Hamilton.
Alexander Hamilton. Right? Is that accurate?
Yes.
Alexander Hamilton and his financial plan. Sorry, John, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. I apologize. Oh, by the way, first off, Congress does 2 key things before we get to Hamilton. Judiciary Act of 1789, remember, Supreme Court, judicial branch, not really mentioned much in the Constitution, and they are, that's basically established during this time, and of course they also passed the Bill of Rights. First 3 are the freedoms, the middle bunch are the judicial rights, and then, of course, you have the all powers not delegated specifically to Congress or reserved to the states.